The Utah desert at night is a place of silence so heavy, it almost feels alive. Wind moves across the sand, whispering through sharp canyons and jagged rocks like voices that never die. There are no city lights here, no hum of traffic, just endless darkness stretching across miles of desert floor, broken only by the faint outlines of distant mountains. For many, it's a land of beauty and wonder, but for some, it becomes a land of secrets. In the summer of 2011, two friends, Mark Reynolds, age 29, and Daniel Whitaker, age 31, set out on a trip that was supposed to be nothing more than an adventure. They were young, curious, and like many travelers, wanted to escape the weight of everyday life. The two had known each other since college, and over the years, their bond had become something like brotherhood. Both men shared a passion for photography, for hiking, for exploring the places most tourists never dared to go. That's why, when they landed in Utah, they skipped the usual stops, the crowded visitor centers, the marked trails, and instead chose the path less traveled. They rented a small SUV in Salt Lake City, loaded it with camping gear, camera equipment, and a few days' worth of food and water. They told family members that they'd be heading south along Route 89, toward the endless expanse of desert and old mining country. Nobody could have known that this trip would be their last. The first clue that something had gone horribly wrong would not surface until nearly a week later, when both men failed to return their rental car. Calls to their phones went unanswered. Their families reported them missing, and soon, local law enforcement began what they thought would be a routine search and rescue. But the Utah desert is not forgiving. Its terrain is vast, stretching for thousands of miles, riddled with canyons, caves, and long-forgotten mines left behind by prospectors more than a century ago. Sheriff David Klein, who oversaw the first search efforts, would later recall his initial thoughts. Two young guys likely ran out of gas or got stuck on a trail. We figured we'd find them within a day or two. But something about this case, from the very beginning, it felt off. The search began with helicopters scanning the desert floor, looking for the white SUV the men had rented. Volunteers on ATVs combed through dry washes and back roads. Flyers with the men's faces, both smiling, both full of life, were posted in gas stations and diners across the region. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The SUV was eventually found, abandoned near an old service road that led deep into Bureau of Land Management territory. The tires were worn down, dust covering every inch. The keys were still inside, but there was no sign of Mark or Daniel. No backpacks, no footprints leading away. Just the silent shell of a car, baking under the desert sun. Their families flew in from out of state, mothers, fathers, siblings, clinging to the hope that maybe the men had gotten lost. Maybe they had taken shelter somewhere. Maybe they were still alive. But as investigators retraced the men's last known steps, one thing became terrifyingly clear. The trail simply vanished. It was as if the desert had swallowed them whole. Interviews from people in the area would only deepen the mystery. A gas station attendant in a small town outside Kanab remembered two young men coming in late at night to buy water and snacks. They looked tired, he said, like they'd been driving all day. One of them asked me if there were any good back roads to take for photos. I told him to stick to the main highway. Out here, you can get lost real easy. Another witness, a retired prospector, claimed he saw headlights moving slowly near one of the abandoned mining roads just before midnight on the night they disappeared. Didn't think much of it at the time, he recalled years later, but looking back now gives me chills. Theories spread quickly. Had they fallen into one of the many hidden mine shafts that dot the desert floor? Had someone stumbled upon them, someone with darker intentions? Or had the desert itself claimed them, as it had claimed so many before? For 8 long years, there were no answers. Only silence. And then in the spring of 2019, a group of hikers, exploring an old abandoned mine, stumbled across something no one was prepared for. Deep underground, where the air smelled of rust and decay, they found 2 human skeletons, seated against the wall, as if the men had simply stopped to rest. The remains were later confirmed through DNA to be Mark Reynolds and Daniel Whitaker, But here's the part that doesn't make sense. The condition of the bodies, the location, the strange details of the mine itself. None of it matched the simple explanation of two hikers getting lost. The discovery only raised more questions than it answered. Because if they had been there all along, why had search and rescue teams missed them? Why were they seated, side by side, as if placed there? And most disturbingly, what did investigators find in that mine, lying next to them, that suggested something much darker had taken place? The truth behind what happened to Mark and Daniel is a story that still haunts those who dared to look too closely. And as we go deeper into this case, you'll see why the discovery of the bodies should have been the end of the story. A tragic conclusion, yes, but at least one with answers. Yet from the very moment investigators descended into that abandoned mine in 2019, it was clear that nothing about what they found made sense. The two skeletons were seated upright, their backs against the cold rock wall. Their clothing, remarkably, was still partially intact, preserved by the dried desert air underground. Faded jeans, boots, fragments of shirts that had once been bright but were now dull and dust-stained. Their backpacks lay at their sides, untouched, as if someone had carefully placed them there. Detective Laura Mackenzie, one of the first to examine the scene, described it later in an interview. It wasn't what I expected. Usually, when hikers get lost or die of exposure, the remains are scattered. Animals, time, nature takes its toll. But here, it was different. They looked arranged, like someone had put them there deliberately. Even more disturbing was what lay between them. A single rusted lantern, its glass cracked, and beside it, a notebook, half-rotted, pages curled and stained, but still legible in parts. The notebook would become the most haunting piece of evidence in the case. But before we get there, let's rewind. When the news first broke that the remains of Mark Reynolds and Daniel Whitaker had been found, their families were contacted immediately. For 8 years they had lived in limbo, never knowing what happened, clinging to faint hope. The call shattered that fragile hope forever. Daniel's sister, Emily Whitaker, later spoke about that day. I remember I dropped the phone. I couldn't breathe. For 8 years, I told myself maybe he'd walk through the door again. Maybe he was alive somewhere. To hear they found him in a mine, just sitting there, I still can't make sense of it. Mark's parents, John and Linda Reynolds, traveled to Utah within days. They met with investigators, sat across from detectives, and demanded answers. But answers were in short supply. In the early days of the investigation back in 2011, the families had criticized the search effort. They felt it was rushed, incomplete. And now, with the bodies discovered in a place so close to where search teams had supposedly looked years before, that anger only deepened. Linda Reynolds spoke bitterly. They told us they searched every mine in that area, every single one. So how do you explain that my son sat in there for 8 years without anyone finding him? How do you explain that? The mine itself was not far from the dirt service road where their abandoned SUV had been discovered back in 2011. In fact, the entrance was less than 2 miles away, a gaping black hole in the earth, partially hidden by rocks and brush. Search logs from 2011 claimed the mine had been inspected, but investigators now weren't so sure. There were no clear records. Some said the shaft was too unstable to enter back then. Others insisted it had been checked. But if it had been checked, why was nothing found? And so the theories began. The forensic examination of the remains revealed no obvious signs of trauma. No broken bones consistent with a fall. No bullet holes. No knife wounds. Cause of death was listed as undetermined. But investigators noted something strange. Both men had relatively full water bottles still in their backpacks, and unopened food packages. If they had gotten lost, why hadn't they used them? If they were seeking shelter, why had they gone deep into a dangerous mine instead of staying near their car? It didn't add up. Then came the notebook. The cover was torn. The ink smeared from years underground, but some pages were salvageable, and what was written inside would send chills through everyone who read it. The handwriting matched Daniel's. It wasn't a travel journal. It wasn't notes about photography or hiking. It was something much darker. The first legible entry. Read, "We thought we were alone out here, But last night, we saw lights. Someone was following us. Mark says it's nothing, but I know what I saw. Out in the desert, there's nowhere to hide. The next entry days later was even worse. They're still out there. We hear footsteps at night, whispers outside the tent. We can't sleep. Mark thinks it's kids or minors messing with us, but I'm not so sure. I feel watched all the time. And then, the final clear line before the writing deteriorated into smudges and frantic scrawls. We're going down into the mine. If anyone finds this, we didn't go here by choice. That single line, we didn't go here by choice. That single line, we didn't go here by choice, shifted the entire investigation because it suggested something terrifying. Mark and Daniel hadn't simply wandered into the mine. Someone or something had forced them there. Detectives began re-interviewing witnesses from 2011. They spoke again with the gas station attendant, the prospector, locals who remembered seeing strange lights in the desert that summer. One man who lived in a trailer off the highway came forward with a chilling story he hadn't shared before. He claimed that in 2011, around the time of the disappearance, he saw two figures walking along the road late at night. Behind them, maybe 100 yards back, was a vehicle with its headlights off, creeping slowly. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now, looking back, he wondered if he'd witnessed the beginning of something terrible. Investigators tried to track down anyone in the area with a history of violence, anyone connected to the old mines. They looked into drifters, ex-convicts, even rumors of strange cult-like groups that supposedly gathered in the desert at night. But every lead either ran cold or raised more questions that the families wanted closure. The police wanted answers, but the truth was buried under 8 years of dust, lies, and silence. And still, the most haunting question lingered. If someone had forced them into that mine, who and why? As investigators dug deeper into the men's final days, they uncovered disturbing connections that suggested this was not just a random disappearance. There were names in Daniel's notebook, names of people neither family recognized, strange references to the Watchers, and even coordinates scribbled in the margins. Coordinates that, when traced, led to another abandoned mine, miles away. Whatever Mark and Daniel had stumbled into, it was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. And as the case widened, detectives began to suspect that these two men might not have been the only ones. The notebook's cryptic coordinates haunted the investigators. When mapped, they pointed to a second abandoned mine, deeper in the Utah desert, miles from where Mark and Daniel's bodies were found. The desert is unforgiving, and even seasoned search teams know that venturing far off established roads carries inherent dangers. Yet, led by the notebook's eerie guidance, Detective Mackenzie assembled a small team of forensic specialists and desert trackers to investigate. The air was dry, the sun blistering as they drove along a narrow dirt trail, the GPS coordinates guiding them through canyons and rocky outcrops. Each mile seemed to stretch time, heightening the sense of unease. The land was silent, save for the occasional wind that rattled the dry brush. When they reached the second mine, its entrance was nearly invisible, camouflaged by years of accumulated sand and debris. The miners of decades past had left little behind, just a hollowed-out mouth of rock, yawning like the gaping maw of a giant dot as the team cautiously descended. Their flashlights pierced the darkness. The walls were etched with strange markings, scratches that could have been claw marks or perhaps symbols. It was difficult to say. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became, and the more unsettling the sense of being watched. They discovered remnants of campfires, old, cold, but telling. Someone had spent time here, hiding from the world. Among the ashes were bits of charred paper and fragments of a tattered tent. Most chilling of all were shoe prints in the dust. 2 small prints, matching a man's size, and several others, larger, heavier, like those of someone who had been leading or forcing the smaller pair. Back at the police station, investigators began cross-referencing desert disappearances from the past decade. A disturbing pattern emerged. Several hikers and travelers had vanished without a trace, all in areas not far from these abandoned mines. Some had been reported missing for months, others for years. And in every case, witnesses recalled seeing strange, unmarked vehicles or figures lurking in the desert at night. Emily Whitaker, Daniel's sister, met with Mackenzie privately. She couldn't shake the feeling that the notebook held more than just coordinates. "There's something about this," she said, her voice trembling. "Daniel wrote names, and I think he knew who was after them. He was scared. He knew they were being watched. I think he tried to leave clues for us." The team pored over the notebook again, this time under forensic light. Hidden among the smudges and faded ink were nearly invisible pencil marks, almost like a secret code. It wasn't just coordinates. There were initials, symbols, and even short phrases like, "Never trust the truckers," and "The men in black always come at night." It was a breakthrough, and terrifying. Whoever had forced Mark and Daniel into the first mine was not acting alone. There was a network, a shadowy presence, that had been moving silently across the Utah desert for years. The investigators decided to interview locals again, revisiting the prospector, the gas station attendant, and the trailer resident who had seen the headlights following the tourists. Each interview revealed pieces of a larger, darker puzzle. The prospector mentioned seeing men in black jackets patrolling the desert at night, carrying flashlights and radios. The gas station attendant recalled seeing the same type of vehicle repeatedly over the years, a dark SUV with no plates, always moving slowly. Observing Dot, it became clear that the two men had stumbled into something terrifying and organized. But what was it? A smuggling operation? A cult? Or something even darker? Something beyond explanation? As the team reviewed other missing person cases, they found one that stood out. A group of college students who vanished in 2013 while backpacking. Witnesses remembered seeing them near one of the mines, talking about a strange figure watching from the canyon. The descriptions eerily matched the details in Daniel's notebook. Forensic experts examined the terrain and noted that the mines were ideal for concealment. Natural traps that could hide bodies and evidence for years. The air circulation was minimal, meaning that any sound could travel strangely, creating the impression of whispers or movement where none existed. Detective Mackenzie spoke to a retired miner who had worked the area in the 1980s. He described rumors of a secretive group that used the mines as hideouts, moving quietly from one location to another, preying on travelers who unknowingly entered their territory. The miners had dismissed the stories as legends, but now, the legends had a horrifying kernel of truth. By the end of the week, the team had cataloged every scrap of evidence from both mines. The picture that emerged was one of meticulous planning and cruel intention. Mark and Daniel had been careful hikers, experienced and cautious. Yet, they had been outsmarted by someone, or some group, who knew the desert intimately, who knew how to remain invisible while watching, guiding, and controlling their prey. The notebook ended with an unsettling line, one that hinted at the deeper mystery yet to be unraveled. If anyone reads this, the desert keeps its secrets, and some secrets are meant to stay buried. And buried they were, at least until investigators began connecting the dots between the abandoned mines, the unmarked vehicles, and the growing list of disappearances. Each clue led to another question, and every answer seemed to deepen the mystery. As the team prepared to explore the second set of coordinates, they realized that what they were uncovering could stretch far beyond Mark and Daniel's tragic story. The desert held other secrets, other victims, and possibly other dangers waiting to be revealed. The chilling realization hung over them. This was far from over. The desert heat was relentless, but Detective Mackenzie and her team pressed on. After analyzing the second set of coordinates, they planned a methodical search of the surrounding canyons. Satellite imagery revealed faint trails, likely from foot traffic, converging toward hidden alcoves and cave entrances that had been overlooked by previous searches. Each path seemed deliberate, almost like the movements of someone mapping the territory, watching. Inside one particularly narrow canyon, the team found remnants of recent activity, discarded food wrappers, a broken camping stove, and footprints that suggested more than one person had passed through. It was not just the location of the tourists' disappearance. It was an active hideout. Forensic teams began cataloging evidence, soil samples, fragments of clothing, and markings on the rocks. The patterns told a story of repeated visits, a network moving quietly through the desert, seemingly undetected. It was becoming clear that Mark and Daniel were not victims of chance. They had stumbled into a carefully orchestrated trap. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed a local park ranger who had been patrolling the area for decades. He recalled seeing strange figures at night, sometimes wearing dark clothing, sometimes appearing to signal each other from a distance. On several occasions, hikers had reported being followed or feeling watched in the most remote parts of the desert. The ranger described it as a pattern that had always been dismissed as paranoia. But now, with bodies found in the mines, the pattern was unmistakable. Back at the station, Emily Whitaker combed through social media, searching for clues about other missing hikers. She found threads on forums where people had reported unmarked vehicles, mysterious figures, and eerie lights in the desert at night. Some of the posts were years old, coinciding with Mark and Daniel's disappearance. One thread mentioned a vanishing point near a rock formation nicknamed the Sentinel, where travelers seemed to disappear without a trace. The team decided to investigate the Sentinel. Using GPS mapping and previous reports, they drove deep into the desert, far beyond the main tourist trails. As they approached, the desert became eerily quiet. There were no birds, no wind, just a suffocating silence. The Sentinel stood as a jagged looming rock formation, casting long shadows even in the late afternoon sun. Inside a hidden crevice at the base of the Sentinel, they found evidence that would shock even seasoned investigators. Remnants of camping gear, a few personal items belonging to missing hikers from the past decade, and faint blood stains. The placement suggested someone had been forcibly hiding or controlling travelers, moving them deeper into the desert or into one of the mines. One of the forensic specialists discovered a crude map scratched into a rock surface, a map that matched the layout of the mines and key locations the team had already investigated. It seemed to be a guide for someone familiar with the terrain, showing escape routes, hiding spots, and observation points. Detective Mackenzie pieced together a chilling timeline. The network had been operating for years, targeting unsuspecting hikers and tourists. The clues suggested meticulous planning, preying on individuals in isolated locations, moving them to concealed areas, and keeping their presence invisible to the outside world. Through cross-referencing reports, the team identified a potential suspect, a man who had been reported multiple times by desert travelers, described as tall, lean, wearing dark clothing, and always carrying a flashlight and radio. Locals referred to him as the Watcher, a name that had appeared in various online discussions and forum posts. Witnesses described him observing from ridges, sometimes guiding unmarked vehicles to certain areas. Emily Whitaker felt a surge of dread. He knew them, she whispered to Mackenzie. Daniel and Mark. They saw him, or at least they sensed him, and that's why he moved them to the first mine. The team realized the desert was not just a random landscape. It was a stage for a predator, a carefully orchestrated theater of horror. The Watcher had been patient, methodical, and terrifyingly skilled at remaining invisible, while his victims wandered unknowingly into danger. As night fell, the desert's shadows stretched long, and the team's flashlights cut through the inky darkness. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the team felt the same eyes, the same unseen presence that Mark and Daniel had once sensed. The fear was palpable, a chilling reminder that the predator was still out there, hidden in plain sight. Mackenzie made the call to stake out the mines overnight. The plan was to wait, observe, and hope that the Watcher would reveal himself. Every rustle of the wind, every shifting shadow heightened their anxiety. They were walking the fine line between hunter and hunted. Hours passed, and then, just past midnight, a faint movement caught the edge of a flashlight beam. A figure, tall and silent, emerged near the ridge, watching, assessing, then disappearing into the shadows. The team's hearts pounded. The legend of the Watcher was no longer a story. It was real, and now they were within striking distance of uncovering the truth. But as they prepared to pursue, the figure vanished entirely, leaving only silence, footprints, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The desert had once again swallowed its secrets, and the team was left with more questions than answers. The night concluded with a haunting realization. The desert was alive with mysteries, and Mark and Daniel's fate was just one piece of a much larger, terrifying puzzle. The morning sun painted the desert in harsh gold, but the unease that had gripped Detective Mackenzie and her team during the night didn't fade. They gathered around the mine entrance, surveying the scene from the ridge above. Notebooks filled with observations, footprints, and fragments of gear collected from the surrounding area. Emily Whitaker reviewed the maps and logs again, searching for correlations between the locations of missing persons and sightings of the Watcher. Patterns began to emerge. Hikers and tourists were often targeted near isolated landmarks where cell reception was weak and escape routes were limited. The Watcher understood the desert intimately. Every ridge, canyon, and mine was a potential trap. They descended into the first mine, the one where Mark and Daniel had ultimately been found. The stale air was thick with dust and the faint, lingering odor of decay. Forensic teams carefully combed every crevice, photographing, cataloging, and preserving evidence. Among the remains, they found personal items, a wallet, a watch, fragments of a journal, each piece telling the story of a life abruptly ended. Detective Mackenzie knelt near one of the body sites. 8 years, she murmured. He waited this long, almost as if he wanted them to be found at the perfect moment, to send a message. The team's analysis revealed something disturbing. The victims had not only been killed but displayed in ways that seemed deliberate. Their position suggested someone wanted them to be discovered eventually. Yet still, the methodical hiding in an abandoned mine indicated careful planning to delay discovery. The Watcher wasn't just killing, he was orchestrating a narrative. They continued to map the surrounding desert, checking previous reports of disappearances. Emily found a thread on an old forum describing a hiker who had narrowly escaped an encounter with a man matching the Watcher's description. His words were chilling. He didn't chase me, but I could feel him everywhere I went, like the desert itself was watching me. Detective Mackenzie assembled the team in the temporary command tent. We're looking for a predator who thrives in isolation, who understands the desert as his territory. He's intelligent, patient, and cruel. Every step we take, we need to think like him, anticipate where he might strike next. Using the forum data, Emily traced the previous sightings and created a timeline. It showed that the Watcher had operated with remarkable consistency, choosing victims with specific profiles, travelers who were unfamiliar with the terrain, who often separated from groups, or who displayed curiosity about hidden paths. Mark and Daniel had unknowingly checked all these boxes. The team decided to stake out the next likely site, a remote canyon several miles from the first mine. Using infrared cameras and motion sensors, they established a perimeter, hoping to capture any movement after dark. The desert, however, remained silent, almost oppressive in its stillness. As night fell, they noticed faint light flickers in the distance, maybe a fire, maybe a reflection from a vehicle. Mackenzie signaled the team to move closer, keeping low and silent. The wind carried strange sounds, a shifting of sand, the distant clang of rocks falling, and sometimes a whisper of movement that could have been imagined or real. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the canyon walls, a call, faint but deliberate, almost like someone signaling. The team froze. Emily whispered, "He's aware we're here. He wants us to know he's watching." From a ridge above, Mackenzie observed movement, the tall, lean silhouette of the Watcher. He didn't approach, he observed. The desert seemed to bend around him, and for a moment, time itself felt suspended. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he vanished into the night. The team followed the faint footprints left in the sand, leading to another hidden crevice. Inside, they found evidence, suggesting more victims, perhaps even more recent ones. The pattern was undeniable. The Watcher had been active for years, escalating in boldness and confidence. Emily's voice trembled slightly as she examined a fragment of clothing. "We're seeing a history of terror here, decades of careful planning, and he's still out there. He's intelligent enough to leave the bodies just out of reach, just enough to maintain control." Mackenzie realized that the next step was critical. They had to identify him, predict his moves, and finally bring him to justice. But the desert was vast, and the Watcher had mastered its shadows. Every decision carried risk. Every misstep could be fatal. The night drew on, and the team set up additional sensors, cameras, and observation points, knowing that the predator they sought was patient, cunning, and relentless. The desert held its secrets tightly, and every clue they uncovered only deepened the mystery. The suspense built to a crescendo when the team discovered a new set of footprints, leading from the crevice to an even deeper section of the mine network, a section no map had marked. Mackenzie realized with a chilling certainty what they had uncovered so far was only the surface of the Watcher's operations. The heart of the horror was still hidden, and entering it would push the team into the most dangerous terrain they had faced yet. The deeper mine was suffocatingly dark, each step echoing against the stone walls like a drumbeat of impending danger. The team advanced slowly, flashlights cutting narrow beams through the dense shadows, revealing jagged rock formations and old mining equipment left to rot. Every corner seemed to whisper warnings. The desert outside felt miles away, irrelevant, as though they had entered another world entirely. Detective Mackenzie's heart pounded in rhythm with the faint drip of water from the ceiling. Emily Whitaker crouched beside a fallen beam, examining the ground. "These markings, they're fresh," she whispered, tracing shallow grooves in the dirt. The Watcher had been here recently. He wasn't just a figure of the past. He was active, cunning, and aware of their presence. As they moved deeper, the walls of the mine opened into a cavernous chamber. The air was colder here, with the distinct metallic tang of old blood. They froze at the sight. Personal items, remnants of past victims, carefully arranged. A journal lay on a rock, pages brittle but legible, detailing the movements of tourists, hikers, and travelers over the years. The handwriting was meticulous, almost obsessive. The Watcher had chronicled his actions, not for fame, but for control. Mackenzie felt a shiver crawl down her spine. He's been cataloging them, every single person he's taken. Emily picked up a photograph tucked into the journal. Mark and Daniel, smiling at the camera, unaware of the danger that loomed over them years ago. The sense of lost innocence was overwhelming. They had walked into the desert believing in adventure. They had walked into a predator's trap. A sudden noise echoed from a narrow passage, a scrape, a whisper of movement. The team tensed, weapons drawn. From the shadows, a tall, wiry figure emerged, silhouette obscured but unmistakably human. It was the Watcher. His eyes glinted in the flashlight beams, calculating, cold, and unrepentant. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. The desert had made him patient. The years had made him confident. He knew these mines as well as the back of his hand. Every misstep by the team had been anticipated. Mackenzie stepped forward. "It's over. We know who you are, what you've done. The desert won't protect you forever." He smiled, a chilling, hollow expression. "The desert never forgets, and neither do I." Before anyone could react, he slipped into a narrow tunnel, disappearing into the darkness, leaving only a faint trail of footprints and the echo of his voice. The team pursued cautiously, tracing the winding tunnels until they found the final chamber. Here, forensic evidence, clothing, and personal items confirmed their worst fears. The Watcher's reign had been long and deliberate, victims spanning decades, carefully hidden and arranged, each a testament to his meticulous cruelty. Emily swallowed hard, recording notes for the investigation. This is the full extent. Everything else we found was just the beginning." The team set up cameras and traps in hopes of capturing him if he returned. Law enforcement coordinated search efforts across the desert and surrounding areas. They were dealing with a predator who had evaded capture for years, but now they had a roadmap of his patterns, a trail of evidence, and a timeline of terror. Months later, the investigation culminated in a coordinated raid. The Watcher was apprehended, quietly, almost effortlessly, in a remote desert shack. Inside, authorities found more journals, photos, and meticulously documented plans. The desert had finally given up its secrets. Back at the command center, Mackenzie addressed the team. "We brought him in, but let this serve as a warning. Predators can hide anywhere, in places we think are safe. Vigilance, awareness, and humanity are our best defenses. The story of Mark and Daniel, the two tourists who vanished in the Utah desert, became a chilling reminder of the fragility of human life and the darkness that can lurk behind familiar landscapes. Families could finally grieve, but the scars of the desert and of the Watcher would linger for generations. As the sun set over the barren ridges, Emily looked out over the desert, now quiet but never entirely at peace. Somewhere out there, others might still be at risk, and the lessons of vigilance and awareness remained crucial. If you were captivated by this chilling story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming deep dives into true crime mysteries that will send shivers down your spine. Share your thoughts below. Which part of the Watcher's story shocked you the most? Stay tuned, because the world of unsolved disappearances is darker than you ever imagined.